In 1972, a company called Humble Oil quietly rebranded itself. New name, same ambition. They called it Exxon. And within a decade, it would become the most profitable corporation in the history of capitalism. Not the most famous, not the most loved, the most profitable. There is a reason for that distinction, and it has everything to do with what is happening in the Middle East right now. Most people know Exxon the way you know a utility pole. It is just there. You pump the gas, you drive away. But that is by design, because the less you think about where your energy comes from, the more freely Exxon can operate in the spaces most people never look. ExxonMobil, the full name after its merger with Mobil in 1999, is not just an oil company. It is a geopolitical actor. It negotiates with governments. It funds research on both sides of the climate debate. It holds more proven oil reserves than most sovereign nations. When its chief executive officer sits down with a head of state, both parties know who has leverage. The company operates in over 50 countries, employs roughly 60,000 people, and generates more revenue in a single quarter than many countries produce in a year. That merger with Mobil, by the way, was the largest corporate merger in history at the time. Regulators approved it anyway. That tells you something about how untouchable this company had become by the turn of the millennium. So why should you care? Because Exxon doesn't just react to world events, it positions itself ahead of them. And right now, one of the most volatile regions on Earth is about to reshape global energy markets in a way that plays almost perfectly into Exxon's hands. Here's where it gets interesting. Iran sits on the fourth largest proven oil reserves on the planet. For decades, sanctions have kept that oil largely locked away from global markets. But war, or even the credible threat of war, doesn't just destroy supply. It redirects it. It reshuffles who wins and who loses in the energy economy. And Exxon has spent the last several years quietly making moves that only make sense if you assume the Middle East is about to get a lot more chaotic. In 2022, Exxon made a massive bet on Guyana, a small South American nation sitting on one of the largest offshore oil discoveries in history. At the time, analysts called it a hedge against instability. In 2023, they doubled down on liquefied natural gas infrastructure in Qatar, one of Iran's closest neighbors and a country that shares the world's largest natural gas field directly with Iran. In 2024, they quietly expanded their trading desk, the division that profits not from producing oil, but from the movement of oil prices themselves. You do not build that infrastructure unless you expect volatility. Volatility in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes every single day, is exactly what an Iran conflict would deliver. Here's the mechanism. When tensions spike around Iran, tankers reroute or pause, supply tightens, and prices jump. Every $1 increase in the price of a barrel of oil translates roughly to an extra $600 million in annual revenue for ExxonMobil. A serious conflict, one that threatens to close or disrupt the Strait of Hormuz even temporarily, could send prices up by $20, $30, even $50 a barrel. The math is almost obscene, but it goes deeper than price spikes. Iran is isolated from global markets, and its oil has been flowing through backdoor channels, largely to China, at heavily discounted rates. If conflict escalates and those channels close further, or if a post-conflict resolution eventually brings Iran back into the legitimate market under Western terms, Exxon is positioned to fill that gap. It has the infrastructure, the refining capacity, and the trading relationships to absorb that volume faster than almost any competitor. There is also the liquefied natural gas angle. Europe spent the last 2 years frantically building out liquefied natural gas import terminals after Russia's invasion of Ukraine disrupted pipeline supply. Those terminals need product to fill them. Exxon's Gulf Coast liquefied natural gas operations are running near capacity, trying to meet that demand. An Iran conflict that further destabilizes pipeline routes through the region would only accelerate Europe's dependence on seaborne liquefied natural gas, which Exxon supplies. This is what energy dominance actually looks like in practice. Not a villain twirling a mustache, just a company that built itself so large, so strategically, that global instability becomes a tailwind. Consequences of this dynamic are real, and they ripple far beyond gas prices. When energy companies profit from conflict, the incentive structure around diplomacy quietly shifts. It does not mean Exxon wants war. It does mean that war is not, financially speaking, a catastrophe for them, and that asymmetry shapes how power flows in Washington, in Brussels, and in the boardrooms that advise governments on sanctions policy and military posture. There is also a domestic angle most people overlook. American energy independence has become a political rallying cry. But true independence would actually hurt Exxon because it is the global price of oil that determines their margins, not the domestic price. So Exxon quietly benefits from a world that remains just unstable enough to keep prices elevated, while publicly championing energy security rhetoric that justifies their expansion. The final surprise here is this. Exxon's biggest competitor in an Iran conflict scenario isn't another oil company. It is a peace deal. A negotiated settlement that reopens Iranian oil supply to global markets in an orderly, regulated way would flood supply, suppress prices, and undercut the very scarcity premium that makes Exxon's current positioning so valuable. The company knows this. And if you watch where their lobbyists focus their energy and which think tanks they fund, that awareness is visible in the subtext. We talk about war in terms of ideology and security. But energy economics is always in the room, even when it is not invited to speak. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe because the stories about how money actually moves through the world are always stranger than the official version. There is a lot more where this came from.